There is a debate among tennis players and tennis coaches which backhand is better, one-handed or two-handed. I have been using both. As a kid, being skinny, not having too much power, I learned naturally to hit the backhand with two hands. But then later on, especially when I started to teach tennis, I realized that I need an extra hand to hold the balls while rallying with my students. So I started to teach myself a one-handed backhand, and actually, to be honest with you, I fell in love with it. Now, why two-handed backhand and why one-handed? If you were a tennis coach or a parent who wants to teach his own child to play tennis, or if you're just a beginning player starting to learn this wonderful sport and you're asking yourself, should I learn to hit one-handed or two-handed backhand? Which one is better and what are the advantages or disadvantages of it? Therefore, in this video, I would like to give you some of my insight in regard to those two styles of backhand. Let's begin with two-handed backhand. A lot of coaches prefer it because it's just easier to teach beginning players. Why? Because it uses two hands and for some reason gives players control when they start to learn this particular shot. Also, later on as a player, you notice that under pressure or when returning serves or let's say high bouncing or kick serves, you find it that it's a lot easier to control the ball with two hands. In regard to creating angles or point of contact, two-handed backhand is a lot more forgiving because you can be a little bit late making contact with the ball, or if you hit it a little earlier or lower or higher, you're going to find that two-handed backhand is more forgiving in regard to the point of contact. So these are some of the advantages of two-handed backhand. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the disadvantages. Two-handed backhand requires a larger group of muscles, so sometimes you might feel a little bit jammed that you have to uncoil and use the hips and shoulders and everything else. Especially if you're not very flexible, you'll find that two-handed backhand is not such a good option. Having said that, let's talk about the one-handed backhand. When I switched from two-handed to one-handed backhand, I realized that it's almost effortless. I mean, you're just turning sideways and let the arm fly. It's very little rotation, and you have to use the legs, and you don't have to uncoil your upper body as much as you do with a two-handed backhand. So, having said that, I have to mention that when one learns the one-handed backhand, they have to understand obviously the grip and the contact is very important. When hitting a one-hander, you have to make contact with the ball out in front. You cannot be late, you cannot be too early, and especially you'll have a hard time hitting the high bouncing balls. So that's where the one-handed backhand player has to learn to hit slice. So the biggest disadvantage of a one-handed backhand is the fact that the contact has to be very precise. You have to make contact out in front. And also the fact that you're using only one hand, you must develop, just work out the forearm so that you have control of your racket at contact. Besides that, let me see, what are the advantages of one-handed backhand? Like I said, it's almost effortless, okay? Once you learn the technique, you realize that it's just a pleasure to hit it. But, like I said, the contact has to be precise. You have to understand your grip. You have to have a fairly strong forearm to control the racket at contact. And you'll have a hard time with the returning serve, especially high bouncing balls. Having said that, you might think that I kind of favor the two-handed over one-handed. But considering that I grew up hitting a two-handed, I still consider that under pressure or just returning serve, two-handed backhand, it's something that gives me more confidence. But I love the one-handed backhand for the simplicity, for the almost effortless way of swinging. When I teach, okay, as a coach, when I teach, I usually give my beginning students options. I tell them, hey, you know what, you can hit the backhand with one hand or two hands. I show them the technique, I have them go through the motion, I feed a few balls to them, and I let them experience the one-handed and the two-handed backhand, and then I ask them, which one do you feel more comfortable? Most of them prefer the two-handed because they feel more, they have more control having both hands. But a lot of them later on realize that the one-handed backhand is something that they should give the try to. All right, so having said that, like I said, those two backhands are different, but it's just a matter of personal style and whatever feels natural. If you're a coach, if you're a parent, or if you're a player, just give both types of backhand a try. Make sure you learn that you understand the contact and you understand the technique before you make the decision which one you want to continue with.